If there's a time where any of you wouldn't care for what I would say and pull anyway, it's this month. And I would completely understand. The fear of missing out is real when it comes to stuff like this. Fortunately, all three are worth using, including our free unit, Yomi. There's two goals with this triple review. First is the usual. I will give my rating on each unit individually. But after that, there will be an extra section where I will go over who you should invest in first. Since all three are wind units, it means they all use wind crystals. And unless you're hoarding 9,000 wind crystals, you won't be able to invest in everyone at once. And that's like even getting into the goddess tiers. So hopefully that section will help you out once we get there. Also, the minimum investment needed for the units are going to be higher than usual, since they're only available for this month. So I'm not going to be comfortable saying you should only leave a unit at their bare minimum. There are budget sections, but I am going into this review thinking that you will be willing to spend everything that you have. As usual, be sure to like and subscribe if you like this content. For now, let's start with our free units. Yomi comes as a +5 unit, and with her exclusive weapon that raises her attack by 67 points. Her base attack is 341, which is only a tiny bit under the average of 352. With her weapon being free, it more than makes up for it. She's a 3x3 AoE wind unit that deals 782% skill damage. Compared to our other 3x3 wind units, this is very high. Summer Dalby doesn't come close, even if you apply the first tick of her dot. And Vanguard Grey is only better against Magic Fiend Hunt bosses, which is pretty specific. In fact, when you compare her to other elements, she's actually very competitive. I've once saw a statement saying Yomi is Wish.com Gestia. I laughed out loud at this, but it also gave me the idea of putting this in perspective. Sacred Gestia is 300% skill damage with plus 100% per target. With that, Sacred Gestia would need 5 targets to reach Yomi's skill damage. While this isn't hard to pull off most of the time, it goes to show just how highly tuned Yomi's skill actually is. When you compare her to other 3x3 units, it's hardly a competition. Even Eclipse, who has a whopping 945% skill damage, is heavily held back because her exclusive gear is terrible. Loane, often regarded as the best 3x3 unit in the game, suffers from a low base match attack of 319. When it comes down to it, Yomi actually has one of the strongest 3x3 skills in the game. There's also been some criticism about her being a very front attacker, which makes her a bit harder to use all of her grid range. But I never bought into this argument since Zenith exists. And the cool part is Zenith is in the Powder of Hope shop right now, so you really don't have an excuse to not have her, especially since Zenith is one of the best utility units in the game. They're both also wind units, which means they're also great to pair up in general. Now, here's the problem. Yomi costs 6 SP even when maxed out. 6 SP is severely limiting to team compositions, especially when you're a newer player. Making an optimal team with Yomi can be very, very hard. Furthermore, this will be Yomi's only costume. Since this costume is on a 3-turn cooldown, this means her downtime for long fights is very high. Everyone I mentioned before will run circles around Yomi's damage per turn, simply because they have costumes to rotate. This only makes Yomi good in general PvE content and Tower of Pride. I would even hesitate to call her good in Tower of Salvation since starting SP is lowered on higher difficulties. All of this combined made it pretty hard to rank Yomi. She's easily the best wind unit for general content, but anything more specific becomes much more questionable. At the end of the day though, this is a one-turn sweep game, and until that changes, I will say Yomi is a valuable unit to invest into. The fact that she and her weapon are free also helps tremendously, which leads to the 7 out of 10 score. Next up is Hikage, and she's much simpler by comparison. Hikage is a boss killer, which is something we don't have a lot of. She does a staggering 12 hits, and with that combined, she does 1,674% skill damage. This is impressive, though not as high as Idol Ventana, who has access to pure damage. But Hikage's niche is more versatile. With 12 hits, she's obviously powerful at stacking chains. You can objectively say she more than doubles everyone's damage against single targets. However, I do have to stress this is all on a single target. She's going to be warm at the bench in general content, and I wouldn't even suggest using her in Tower of Pride. That said, she is extremely powerful in Last Night, Fiend Hunts, and Guild Raids. She will absolutely make a difference to your ranking prowess in those modes, and that alone is worth picking her up. Like I said, she's a simple unit and she's in a niche of her own, and out of all the units in this event, she has the longest staying power. Even if you don't care about her damage, you still want to get her to +4, so she can chain stack every turn. She's not a must pull, especially since Celia exists and she's still a lot better at chain stacking, but I think the 8 out of 10 is warranted. Last up is Yozakura. She brings in much needed wind damage to support Dalby's efforts. Yozakura's tower range and skill design suggests she's meant to be a secondary damage unit to help clean up the field. This is because after her skill attack, her next basic attack is enhanced by 1200%. On top of this, the skill damage itself stands at 940%. This is very good. For reference, Admiral Sylvia sits at 600% skill damage, and Snow White Ventana stands at 950% on taunting enemies and 450% on everything else. So for someone with this tile range, this is pretty strong. The problem though is her rotation. Sure, she has a bonk that restores 1 SP, but I find it really hard to call this a selling point. Sure, it's nice, but it's just kind of there. It's like she's trying to fall into the same niche as Elise, but Elise is actually SP positive with her rotation. Yozakura is not. That said, the elephant in the room here is Vinaka. Vinaka just shits all over Yozakura in terms of being a support damaging unit. Since Vinaka shreds magic resistance, she's going to be tons more valuable against magic resistance enemies. She also has a much better grid range, especially when upgraded. And then to top it all off, Vinaka stands at 700% skill damage. Not as high as Yozakura, but it doesn't need to be with all of her other advantages. So really, Yozakura's main selling point is just her damage is really high once fully invested. And I guess enhanced bonking gives a half rotation, which is at a better spot than where Yomi is. She is the unique one out of the bunch where she can be useful in all content. As a supporting damage unit, she can clean up what others cannot, and being a magic unit means she can enjoy Helena's buffs. But the fact is, Vinaka does exist, and Vinaka is only going to get more powerful once she gets another costume. This makes Yozakura the least valuable out of the bunch, so I'm pretty comfortable with putting her at a 5 out of 10. As for who to invest in first, this will largely depend on your account progression. If you're in the early game or a new player, the answer is easily Yomi. She'll be your hard carry even at 7 SP. Your biggest trouble will be grinding general battles, which Hikage is awful at. And while Yozakura is good at it, she's not as good as Yomi, especially if you're geared towards a physical team. For any other scenario, Hikage is who you should invest in first. This is because you already have teams being built up, and someone like Yomi and her 6 SP cost is much harder to slot in. With Hikage's clear role, it is easy to make use of her immediately. As for who you should invest in next, just keep in mind Yozakura is there for magic teams. So choosing between her and Yomi will depend on if you have the magic support. So basically, if you have Helena and Elpis first, then build Yozakura. If you do not, then build Yomi and build a team around Yomi. Now, if you don't mind, I need to figure out how I'm going to pull for Yumi.